This is the History of Portugal podcast, an Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Check us out on our Facebook page, the History of Portugal podcast, on YouTube, as well as my website, www.eattomyownbeat.com.
A king dies of plague at 46, leaving behind a 5-year reign that somehow managed to reshape an entire nation's approach to governance. Today, we're diving into Edward of Portugal, known as the Philosopher King, whose brief but transformative rule from 1433 to 1438 introduced revolutionary ideas about political consensus and royal accountability. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how one thoughtful monarch's approach to power influenced centuries of Portuguese politics and why his tragic end makes his achievements even more remarkable.
So let me turn this over to someone who can help us understand what made Edward so special in the landscape of medieval monarchy.
Edward's story really begins with his extraordinary family. According to Wikipedia, he was born in 1391 as the son of John I of Portugal and Philippa of Lancaster, making him part of what historians call the illustrious generation, this remarkable group of royal siblings who basically transformed Portuguese civilization in the 15th century.
Wait, the illustrious generation? That sounds like something out of a fantasy novel.
Right? But it's real history. Edward's brother was Henry the Navigator, who basically launched the Age of Discovery. And Edward himself became known as both the Philosopher King and the Eloquent. The page content shows he was actually the second-born son, but became heir when his older brother Afonso died at age 10 in 1400.
So he wasn't originally supposed to be king. How did that shape him?
Well, according to the sources, before ascending to the throne, Edward always followed his father in the affairs of the kingdom. He was knighted in 1415 after the Portuguese capture of Ceuta in North Africa. So he had this extensive apprenticeship in governance that most heirs don't get.
And when did he actually become king?
August 14, 1433, when his father John I died of the plague. Edward was 41 years old, so he came to power as a mature, experienced leader, not some young prince learning on the job.
Okay, so what made him the Philosopher King? Was he just really into books?
It goes way deeper than that. According to Britannica, Edward was described as a scholarly, sensitive man of high moral character who actually wrote a book called Leal, Conselheiro, the Loyal Counselor. But here's what's really fascinating. He put his philosophy into practice.
How so?
Well, the page content tells us that during his short reign of 5 years, Edward called the Portuguese Cortes, that's the National Assembly, no less than 5 times to discuss political affairs. That's unprecedented for a medieval monarch.
5 times in 5 years? That's like once a year. For a king in the 1400s, that's basically revolutionary democracy.
Exactly. And it shows he was genuinely interested in what Wikipedia calls building internal political consensus. He wasn't just ruling by decree, he was actually consulting with representatives about the kingdom's affairs.
But he wasn't just about politics, right? Didn't he also support exploration?
Absolutely. The sources show he followed his father's policies on maritime exploration of Africa and encouraged and financed his famous brother Henry the Navigator. In fact, during Edward's reign in 1434, Gil Eanes first rounded Cape Bojador on the northwestern coast of Africa.
So he's supporting both democratic consultation at home and exploration abroad. That's a pretty progressive agenda for the 1430s.
But Edward also made some significant legal reforms. According to Britannica, shortly after becoming king, he promulgated something called the Ley Mental on April 8, 1434, which facilitated the recovery of certain royal land grants and made others subject to royal confirmation at the start of each new reign.
Okay, that sounds pretty technical. What did that actually mean in practice?
It was basically about strengthening royal control over land distribution and making sure the monarchy could reclaim grants that weren't serving the kingdom's interests. It shows Edward was thinking systematically about how to make the monarchy more effective and accountable.
So far, this sounds like a pretty successful reign, but I'm guessing there's a darker turn coming?
Unfortunately, yes. The page content reveals that Edward faced serious challenges with Portugal's colonial possessions. The colony at Ceuta rapidly became a drain on the Portuguese treasury, and they realized that without controlling Tangier, possession of Ceuta was basically worthless.
Why was that?
Well, according to the sources, after the Portuguese captured Ceuta, The camel caravans that were part of the overland trade routes began using Tangier as their new destination instead. This deprived Ceuta of the materials and goods that made it an attractive market, turning it into an isolated community.
So they accidentally killed their own golden goose by disrupting the trade routes.
Exactly. And this led to a fateful decision. In 1437, Edward's brothers Henry and Ferdinand persuaded him to launch an attack on the Marinid Sultanate of Morocco to capture Tangier. But the page content notes, this expedition was not unanimously supported and was undertaken against the advice of the Pope.
Against the Pope's advice? That seems like a red flag for a medieval king.
It really was. And according to Britannica, the expedition was a complete failure. Even worse, Edward's youngest brother Fernando was captured during the attack.
Oh no. So this thoughtful, consensus-building king made one bad military decision and it cost him his brother?
That's exactly what happened. And the sources tell us that Edward was grief-stricken by Fernando's capture. The Academia Lab page notes that Fernando was taken prisoner and died shortly afterwards in the prison of Fez.
This is heartbreaking. How did Edward handle this tragedy?
He didn't have long to handle it. According to multiple sources, Edward died shortly after his brother's capture. The page content from Academia Lab describes how in 1438, while the court was in Évora, an epidemic of the Black Death arose.
The plague again? The same thing that killed his father?
Yes, it's this tragic pattern. The sources tell us that Edward, with his pregnant wife Eleanor and two of their youngest children, fled from Évora to Aviz, then to Ponte de Sor, and finally to Tomar, where he died on September 9, 1438, at age 46.
Wait, so he died alone, trying to protect his family from the plague?
Not entirely alone. According to the page content, his brothers were notified, but only Pedro arrived in time to accompany him on his deathbed. His wife Eleanor wasn't with him in his final moments, presumably to avoid contagion for herself and their unborn child.
That's just devastating. This brilliant, thoughtful king dies at 46, separated from his family, after losing his brother in a military disaster.
But here's what's remarkable. Despite the tragic end and the brevity of his reign, Edward's impact on Portuguese governance was profound. His approach to consultation and consensus building influenced how Portuguese monarchs thought about their relationship with their subjects for generations.
You know what strikes me about Edward's story? He represents this fascinating tension between idealism and pragmatism in leadership.
That's such an insightful point. His commitment to consultation and legal reform shows this idealistic vision of what monarchy could be. But then the Tangier expedition shows how even thoughtful leaders can make catastrophic decisions when pressured by circumstances.
And the fact that he wrote The Loyal Counselor while actually ruling, that's like a president writing political theory books while in office. It shows he was constantly thinking about the nature of power and responsibility.
Exactly. And when you consider that he was part of this illustrious generation alongside Henry the Navigator, it really shows how this one family transformed Portugal during a crucial period in European history.
The timing is incredible too. This is happening right as Portugal is becoming a major maritime power, and Edward is trying to balance domestic reform with colonial expansion.
And that balance is exactly what makes his story so compelling. He succeeded brilliantly at the domestic side, the legal reforms, the consultation with the Cortes, the support for exploration. But the colonial military adventure was his downfall.
It makes you wonder what Portugal might have looked like if Edward had lived longer and been able to fully implement his vision of consultative monarchy.
That's one of history's great what-ifs. But even in 5 short years, he demonstrated that medieval monarchy didn't have to be purely autocratic. His legacy shows that thoughtful, principled leadership can have lasting impact even when cut tragically short.
And there's something poetic about the fact that he's buried in the monastery of Batalha, which his father founded. It's like this symbol of the Aviz dynasty's commitment to both military achievement and spiritual reflection.
That's beautiful. And it connects to the broader story of the House of Aviz, which according to the page content ruled Portugal from 1385 until 1580 and established Portugal as a global power during the Age of Discovery.
So when you step back from all this, what's Edward's real legacy? What should we remember about the Philosopher King?
I think Edward shows us that leadership isn't just about making bold decisions. It's about creating systems and processes that outlast any individual ruler. His commitment to consultation and legal reform created a template for more accountable monarchy.
And his tragedy reminds us that even the most thoughtful leaders are human. They can be pressured into decisions that contradict their better judgment, especially when family and national pride are at stake.
Exactly. Edward's story is ultimately about the complexity of power, how someone can be both visionary and flawed, successful and tragic, all within the span of 5 short years.
You know what's remarkable? In an age when most kings are remembered for their conquests or their wealth, Edward is remembered for his ideas about governance and his commitment to consultation. That says something profound about what really matters in leadership.
And in our current moment, when we're constantly debating the balance between decisive leadership and democratic consultation, Edward's example feels surprisingly relevant. He proved you can be both thoughtful and effective, at least until external pressures force impossible choices.
The next time you hear someone say that medieval monarchs were all autocratic tyrants, remember Edward the Philosopher King, the man who called Parliament 5 times in 5 years and died trying to balance idealism with the harsh realities of power. Sometimes the most profound legacies come from the briefest reigns.
Thank you for listening to the History of Portugal podcast, a Eat My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Get more information on the History of Portugal podcast on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out www.eatmyownbeat.com for more information on our travels.